If you've been on the internet for long enough, you've probably heard of Danganronpa. It's a series of quirky little murder mystery games with annoying characters and pink blood. There's a lot that can be said about this strange little franchise, and a lot has been said already. So let's just make my intentions clear from the get-go. This video will be focusing on the story of the first game only. If you want the best possible experience, I highly recommend playing the game yourself. Otherwise, you can have a good understanding of the first game's events, story, and themes by watching this video. But before we cover the game itself, let's have a basic history lesson of the franchise as a whole. Everything began with Kazutaka Kodaka, who spearheaded the Danganronpa franchise and helped write basically everything in it. Kodaka had about 8 years of professional writing experience under his belt for various companies, usually specializing in scenario creation and larger story work. After coming to Spike in the late 2000s, Kodaka pitched them a game idea, Danganronpa Distrust. The game would be a gritty and gruesome visual novel about high schoolers trapped in a killing game. Although it was initially turned down by Spike, Kodaka toned down the gore a bit, and they accepted his pitch. Kodaka's bloody death game pitch was brought into a colorful existence, with a vibrant palette and an eccentric cast of characters to go alongside its comically macabre plot. Thanks to the art style and, well, the existence of anime, most of the fanbase are young teens. The obnoxious fanbase is probably the most memorable part of Danganronpa, but I wouldn't hold it against them. After all, most of them are kids, and we were all cringy kids at one point or another. These overly passionate fanbases scare away audiences from many different things, with some other popular examples being Hiroaka, Demon Slayer. Okay, basically all anime deals with this problem, it's kind of inherent to the medium. Anyways, the first game, Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc, would release on the PSP in 2010. Between hardware limitations and the relatively small budget, the game was fairly basic, being a mix of visual novel and puzzle mechanics and culminating in a pretty unique experience. In 2012, the game got a mobile port, then Spike became Spike Chunsoft, and over time Danganronpa expanded into a fairly successful multimedia franchise. The first game was also ported over to some other devices, where its original limitations were in painful display. But as I said, the most notable thing about the franchise is its juvenile fanbase, and by extension, the series is often dismissed in any critical sense. After all, if you're looking for a good mystery game, just play something from the Ace Attorney series or, not this. But hear me out, Danganronpa is good. I won't die on a hill proclaiming the entire series to be perfect, but most of the games are a lot better than people give them credit. This is even the case with the first game. The story of the first game is pretty good, and even if the game feels terribly optimized on anything with more processing power than a microwave, it still manages to be a fun experience. But people can't be convinced so easily, so it's easier to just show, or I guess tell you, what I mean. Like a set of parents hung up on past regrets, live vicariously through my experiences as we go through the entire story of Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc.
Margaret Thatcher's dead!
We start with the view of the illustrious Hope's Peak Academy, a school for the ultimate prospective students of every field. The school is considered to be a bastion for the next generation, where the best of the best come to hone their skills and drive the world forward. Everybody who goes to this school is special. The students are prodigies in their respective fields, with those fields being anything from fashion, to physics, to leading a gang. And then you have Makoto Naegi, also known as Pre-NEET Kirito. Makoto is the ultimate lucky student, a title granted to him after winning a random selection to attend Hope's Peak. He knows all about the other students in his class, believing himself unimportant and forgettable by comparison. But either way, he stands in front of the school of his dreams, ready to attend his first day. But as we enter the school, the screen fades to black. When we come to, we find ourselves in the classroom. As opposed to a typical school, however, the windows are completely bolted shut and a camera is sitting in the front of the room watching us. With nothing else to really do, we start looking around the school. We end up at the front entrance where a large vault-style door blocks our exit. In addition, we also see all of Makoto's new classmates. There are 14 characters that we're introduced to. First, we have Sayaka Maizono, a member of a famous pop group and dubbed the ultimate pop sensation. Next, we have Kiyotaka Ishimaru, a model student known as the ultimate moral compass. Third, we have Toko Fukawa, a novelist who has several awards, various bestsellers, and the title of ultimate writing prodigy. Fourth, we have Leon Kuwata, the ultimate baseball star who apparently wants to become a musician. Fifth, we have Hifumi Yamada, the ultimate fanfic creator and professional pervert. Next up is Mondo Owada, ultimate biker gang leader and national menace. At the halfway point is Junko Enoshima, whose images plaster every magazine as the ultimate fashionista. Then we have Kyoko Kirigiri, who... actually that's all she tells us. Ninth is Chihiro Fujisaki, the sweet and socially awkward ultimate programmer who has amassed a, quote, legion of fans. Bringing us into the double digits is Aoi Asahina, the airheaded ultimate swimming pro whose bodily proportions are a hot topic. The largest member of the class is Sakura Ogami, the ultimate martial artist with a 400-0 record and sporting a body that belongs in the Baki series. The largest ego in the class is Byakuya Togami, the heir to a massive fortune that he continues to enlarge as the ultimate affluent progeny. The penultimate classmate is Yasuhiro Hagakure, the ultimate clairvoyant who has been held back, holy shit, I think 5 times? The last and by far most eccentric cast member is Celestia Ludenberg, the ultimate gambler whose name is definitely not what she claims it to be. After we get the introductions out of the way, we're called to the gym. Here, we meet the antagonist of our game and the series as a whole, Monokuma. This stuffed agent of hell explains the premise of the game. The students of Hope's Peak are trapped in the school. Leaving things as they are, they will live out the rest of their lives in the academy, never seeing the light of day again. But there is a way for a student to get out. All they need to do is murder another student. Our prologue finishes, but we aren't moving on to chapter 1 just yet. Due to the sheer length of this game, and by extension the sheer length of this video, I'm going to be focusing on one primary aspect of the story and also ignoring the other. First, the part that I'm ignoring, the characters. From the start, being introduced to a large cast of characters comes with inherent limitations. Trying to flesh out a large cast can take a really long time to do, but you can only spend so much time focusing on that cast before the game becomes boring. It's also kinda pointless if you end up killing off most of the cast by the end of the game. So, instead of going through a long, arduous, and likely boring process of characterizing everybody, it's easier to just immediately establish their characters by making them fit into certain boxes. And of course, the easiest way to do that is to play into tropes and stereotypes, like an obnoxious fat nerd, or a stuck-up rich kid, or a kinda brain-dead athlete, or a socially inept writer. So yeah, most of the characters play into stereotypes to quickly establish their personalities. It's a quick and simple solution to a problem that would otherwise get in the way of a player's experience, so it's an understandable move on the developer's part. It's also important to look at these characters through a period-correct lens. Back when the game came out, these character archetypes weren't nearly as overbearing as they are in the modern anime scene. Of course, the cast also gets a lot more depth as we progress through the game. But as I said, I'll be skating over this aspect, and that's for one big reason. Most of the characterization for the cast is done in optional content, and that content can only be experienced in fairly small chunks. Basically, giving a high quality and thorough coverage of the entire cast, which would be the best way to do that since it would be fair to everybody, would take a couple of hours on its own and require a lot of playthroughs of the games. Which I might be down for, at least in another video, not this one. As for what I really want to focus on throughout the game, it's pretty simple. Going into the game, we know absolutely nothing about the world we find ourselves in, and, conveniently enough, neither does the cast. So, since we're all in the same situation, figuring out the reason behind the killing game takes the primary focus of the story. To help illustrate this, each chapter I'll do a basic lore recap, building on it as we progress through the game. Now that you have a better idea of what I'm going to be rambling about, let's start the first chapter.
Danganronpa.
Starting with the view of the confused students, we learn more details about our school life. First, each student has their own unique e-handbook, where we can find the rules that the students are bound by. Currently, they are as follows. Rule 1. Students are not allowed to leave the school. Rule 2. From 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., various areas in the school are off limits. This is known as nighttime. Rule 3. Sleeping outside of the school dormitories is not allowed and will be punished accordingly. Rule 4. Students are free to explore the school as they see fit. Rule 5. Students are not allowed to fight Monokuma or destroy surveillance equipment. Rule 6. A student who kills another student will become blackened, and if they're not discovered, they will graduate. Rule 7. Additional rules can be added at any time. Most of the rules feel straightforward, although that doesn't exactly make the situation better for the cast. The students start to panic, deciding to try and find a way to escape the school. During the commotion, Mondo one-taps Makoto, meaning we get to miss out on the entire school investigation. But as a consolation prize, we wake up in his bed and we get to explore his room. During our room investigation, we learn that each room has the following traits. First, the front door has a lock, and this lock is completely pick-proof. Second, the bathrooms only have locks in the girls' rooms. Third, the water in all the bathrooms is turned off at night. And last but not least, each girl's room has a sewing kit, and the boys' rooms have basic toolkits. This information may seem off topic, but I have 2 words to counter that. Chekhov's gun. After learning about the dorm rooms, we start talking with our first companion in the game, Sayaka. Aside from being in a popular idol group, she was also Makoto's classmate in middle school. After some more chatter, the entire class talks about their findings. The students conclude that they are completely trapped in Hope's Peak Academy. The school is locked off, isolated from the outside world, will seemingly never run out of supplies, and is constantly monitored by Monokuma. As we'll see, lunchroom discussions are the main time when we get to see all of the characters interact with one another. These discussions further establish the personalities of the more social characters. Toko is snarky, foul-mouthed, and insecure. Byakuya is antagonistic and incredibly arrogant. Hifumi is a perverted and socially awkward loser. Celeste is just weird. So already we get a good amount of characterization. Overall, the dialogue is pretty good, but in true visual novel fashion, we have to read most of it ourselves. The characters do have generic voice lines, and they do talk throughout the entirety of the trials, but voiced content is relatively sparse. Before our first discussion ends, Celeste establishes an unwritten rule. The students won't wander around during nighttime hours. Everybody agrees to this, and we head back to Makoto's room. Makoto goes to his bathroom, where we learn that his bathroom door gets stuck on his frame. Again, Chekhov's gun. After that, we finish our first day. As far as our primary gameplay loop is concerned, there are 3 main phases of each chapter: school life, investigation, and trial. School life is when there aren't any dead students to worry about. So, we do normal school stuff, hanging out with other people, giving them gifts, praying they aren't the victim of the chapter, not doing school stuff. Then there's the investigation phase, where a body has been discovered and we have to gather clues and witness testimonies about the case. Finally, we have the class trial, where we use the previously gathered evidence to find and convict the killer. Of course, the phases go in that order, so let's start our first school life phase. We get our first free time segments as the entire class gets acquainted with one another. They are the optional content that I mentioned I'd be skipping over earlier, so I'll only ever mention when they happen. After 2 days, or 4 sessions, of free time, Monokuma introduces a key aspect of the trials: motives. Our first motive is in the form of a video, during which we see an ominous message regarding the fate of Makoto's family. We assume that everybody else had a similarly ominous video, as we look around at terrified faces and a tense atmosphere. Sayaka has a mental breakdown, and Makoto vainly tries to help her calm down. Later that night, Sayaka knocks on Makoto's door, saying someone was trying to break into her room. Makoto ends up swapping rooms with Sayaka, and we sleep in her room for the night. In the morning, however, Sayaka can't be found in the lunchroom, and when we go into Makoto's room, it's a complete mess. Something bad obviously took place here, and the chaos seems to lead into Makoto's bathroom. When we go inside his bathroom, Makoto faints because he's kind of a bitch, but when he comes to, Monokuma informs everybody of how the investigations and trials work. After a body is discovered, an investigation takes place, then a trial. If the killer is correctly discovered, they are executed. If they aren't discovered, everybody but the killer is executed and the killer gets to leave the school, thereby winning the killing game. Right after this explanation, we get our second character death, as Junko is killed for attacking Monokuma. The rest of the cast would love to mourn her loss, but they have a murder case to solve. As for Makoto, he's under quite a lot of pressure, considering that the murder took place in his room. The evidence we get throughout these investigations fall into two main categories: witness testimonies and physical evidence. Collected evidence is stored in our e-handbook as truth bullets, which will be explained in due time. The investigation is straightforward, but it still takes a while. We have to investigate thoroughly since we're kinda the only actual player here. There isn't much else to talk about, so let's just get into the first investigation. We start our investigation at the gym with the view of Junko's dead body. Here, Monokuma gives us our first case file, which contains some details about Sayaka's death. The time of death was around 1:30 in the morning, it took place in the bathroom, and her injuries were a broken wrist and a stab wound to her stomach. With little else to do in the gym, we head to Makoto's room. First, Makoto recalls the room switch. Sayaka said she wouldn't open the door for anybody, and since it's impossible to break into the rooms, we have our first mystery. Makoto also questions the fact that he didn't hear any struggle, but Sakura clears that up after recalling that the rooms are all soundproofed. Actually doing our job now, we turn our attention to the damage strewn about the room. We see a golden katana on the floor, which you might have seen Makoto bring to his room during the chapter's school life phase. It's covered in gold dust, but there are several spots where that dust has been rubbed off. The sword's sheath also has a gouge in it, obviously made by the scuffle. Then we note the toolkit in our room hasn't been used. Mondo mentions that nobody should have opened their toolkits yet, considering that it's only been a couple days since the students got there. Next, we talk to Kyoko, who will quickly find to be the savior for this investigation. She asks Makoto if he's a clean freak, and when he says no, she notes that somebody's completely cleaned the floor with the lint roller. With nothing else in the main room to note, we go inspect Sayaka's body in the bathroom. First, we can see the knife poking out of her stomach, and her broken wrist has gold dust on it. Moving focus to behind her body, we see the numbers 11037 written in blood. We consult Kyoko about this, and she gives Makoto a puzzle to work out. Sayaka's writing would be upside down if she wrote it while up against the wall. So, what could she have been writing? Makoto doesn't connect anything, but more observant viewers might realize it pretty quickly. Kyoko changes topic, asking Makoto about his door. He mentions the whole getting stuck on the frame thing, and then we realize that the doorknob was removed from the door. Makoto tells Kyoko that Sayaka was the only other person who knew about the door frame, and then Kyoko just kinda leaves. So, we investigate everything else by ourselves. Going into the kitchen, we note that a knife is missing from the wall. We ask Hina about this, and she basically just says that she was in the lunchroom when it was taken. She also questions Makoto's innocence, but we kind of just ignore her and move on to the garbage room. Access to the incinerator is locked, with only one person having the key at any given time. That makes disposal significantly more difficult. The person with this access right now is Hifumi, who informs us that the ownership of the trash key is on a weekly rotation. He brings us back to the trash room, where we see a bloody piece of a shirt and a broken glass ball next to the incinerator. The incinerator is also on, which according to Hifumi wasn't the case the previous day. Next, we head towards the gym and confirm that the glass ball was Hiro's crystal ball, which he had lost at some point the previous night. Last, but certainly not least, we decide to find Sayaka's motive DVD. We grab it from her room and watch it in the AV room. Similar to Makoto's DVD, Sayaka's idol group all seem to be in pretty bad shape, explaining her panic during the previous day. And with that, we're called to start the trial. So, we approach the red door for our first time. The pressure is on for Makoto, as the rest of the class still suspects him, and Kyoko says that he has to figure out the case for himself. Sitting in our first trial room, I can explain how the trials actually work. The bearer explains it like this.
Let's begin with a basic explanation of the class trial. So, your votes will determine the results. If you can figure out who done it, then only they will receive punishment. But if you pick the wrong one, then I'll punish everyone besides the blackened, and the one that deceived everyone else will graduate.
In terms of actual gameplay, it works like this. Each class trial is an amalgamation of minigames and QuickTime events. We listen and read the arguments Makoto's classmates make, shooting holes in their contradictory words and slowly piecing together the true narrative of the case. The minigames vary in quality, which you'll have plenty of time to see throughout the video. And just to explain what you're seeing on the screen, The courtroom is arranged in a circle with 16 chairs in total. That leaves one chair empty, which Monokuma just says allows the court to fit an extra person. As for the weird signs in the circle, all dead students are replaced by portraits with a pink X covering their face. So without further ado, let's start the first trial. The start of the trial focuses on pretty brain-dead questions, mainly just used to introduce us to the game's mechanics. The first important subject, however, is Makoto's involvement in Sayaka's murder. This is actually spurred on by Leon, who declares Makoto to be the murderer.
I mean, we all know Makoto killed her, right?
Hina's account clears us of initial suspicion, and then we learn about the possibility of an accomplice. The bear dictates that an accomplice can exist in a murder, but only the actual murderer will graduate. He also mentions that there isn't an accomplice in this case, so that makes things much more simple. Back to Hina's account, we actually learn that Sayaka was the one who grabbed the knife from the kitchen. Suspicion is still pretty heavy on Makoto, so we get our first minigame, Hangman's Gambit. This is just a spelling minigame with floating letters. It's not inherently awful, but you'll see that it tends to create some stupid situations later on in the game. After playing our first round of Hangman's Gambit, we use Makoto's hairless room and his bathroom door frame to solidify his innocence. Next, the class addresses how the killer got into Sayaka's room, where Kyoko introduces a new piece of evidence to the trial. The previous night, Sayaka had actually written somebody else a note using the notepad in Makoto's room. She figures this out with the imprint that was left on the notepad after Sayaka wrote the note. The story comes together as Sayaka switching rooms with Makoto, then soliciting somebody else to come to Makoto's room, which she further disguised by switching the room's nameplates around. They still assume she was attacked by the culprit first, but Sayaka's clean palms contradict this. If she had defended herself using the golden sword, then gold would have gotten on her hands. And since water doesn't run in the evening, she wouldn't have been able to wash that dust off anyways. I mentioned it earlier, like all good mysteries, this series has a lot of entanglements with Chekhov's gun. Anyways, Sayaka's role turns from that of an innocent victim to that of a murderous trickster, with Makoto being the intended scapegoat. Although the case has been effectively worked out, the culprit still isn't known. Luckily, we have one more trick up our sleeve, 11037. With Kyoko's assistance, we realize that the message isn't a number, but an upside down name. And that name is... Leon.
Here's my answer.
The class proceeds to dogpile Leon with evidence, culminating in our second minigame, the closing argument. This minigame basically gives a complete recap of the events that occurred during the case. Conveniently, they also involve Makoto talking about the entire case. So here's how the first case breaks down according to Makoto.
I think I'd better take one more look back at the case from the beginning. Last night, the killer went to the room Sayaka was in. From what we can tell, Sayaka invited that person there intending to kill them. She attacked them with the knife she'd taken from the kitchen earlier. But then something happened that she wasn't prepared for. They grabbed the fake sword I put in my room and fought back. During the struggle, a strike from the sword broke Sayaka's right wrist. And that's when she lost her grip on the kitchen knife. Finding herself cornered, Sayaka panicked and ran into the bathroom. The killer went after her, but couldn't get the bathroom door open. What they didn't know was that my bathroom door got stuck easily, and there was a trick to opening it. Sayaka knew about that because I told her, but of course the killer had no way of knowing. So instead, the killer forced the door open, took the kitchen knife, and stabbed Sayaka. But with what strength she had remaining, Sayaka left a dying message. To keep the killer from noticing, she wrote it on the wall behind her. And with that, all her strength was gone. With Sayaka dead, the killer quickly began destroying the evidence. First, they took off their shirt, which was covered in their victim's blood. Then they took the lint roller in my room and cleaned up the entire area. They wanted to make sure they got rid of any trace they'd ever been there. Afterwards, the killer headed to the trash room to destroy their bloody shirt. They tried to burn the shirt using the incinerator there, but the trash room was blocked off by an especially sturdy gate, preventing access to the incinerator. So they came up with a plan to use Hero's crystal ball, which he'd left in the laundry room. The killer managed to throw the ball through the gap in the gate and hit the incinerator switch. For any normal person, that'd be an impossible throw. But the killer had the confidence to take a shot, and that's because the killer was the ultimate baseball star. The crystal ball, thrown with absolute precision, hit the switch on the incinerator, which then quickly roared to life. Having destroyed the final piece of evidence, they left the area with, I imagine, a sigh of relief. But there was one thing they missed. Part of the shirt they'd thrown into the fire burnt away and fell out of the incinerator. The killer didn't notice this, and so left behind a piece of indisputable evidence. Isn't that right, Leon?
Everybody but Leon is convinced by the closing argument, and he's still in complete denial. So to break his spirit, we play our third and final minigame, a bullet time battle. Bullet time battles are rhythm games in which we must shoot down the opposing person's remarks to a beat. If we hit the remarks in time, their health is damaged. If we don't, then the remarks blow up, damaging us. The minigame ends with us presenting a key piece of evidence that breaks whatever argument our opposition was making. We seal Leon's fate by asking him to show us his toolkit, which he had to have used to break into Makoto's bathroom. He concedes, is promptly voted guilty, and then we get our first execution of the game. With Leon's death, Chapter 1 is effectively over, but before I move on to Chapter 2, we need to review this chapter first. The first chapter is a solid introduction to the game. The clues are straightforward, which fits its role as a tutorial. We get some introductory character information, and start to see a small character arc for Makoto as he becomes less naive. Oh yeah, I guess I should address that first, huh? I brushed over it a lot, but the friendship and romance between Sayaka and Makoto is ham-fisted to say the least. Of course, Sayaka was trying to manipulate Makoto, but every death flag was flying high in the chapter. Like seriously, you can't immediately introduce us to a love interest when the game involves murdering each other. That never ends well. But regardless of that, I think it's more interesting to look at it from Makoto's perspective, since we can't actually influence his decisions. You may have noticed that I mix up we and Makoto when I refer to our actions. It's not just me being lazy. Rather, the difference in our experiences causes a sort of cognitive dissonance between the player and the player character. It's almost like we're supervising Makoto, responsible for digging him and the rest of the class out of the trouble that they find themselves in. Anyways, back to the whole manipulation thing. After the trial, Makoto and Kyoko talk about Sayaka and her feelings towards Makoto. As Kyoko points out, Sayaka's intentions are obvious in retrospect. However, they weren't just malice towards Makoto. After all, Sayaka made sure to clear Makoto's name after her plot backfired. At the end of the day, Sayaka was backed into a corner and worried about her friends on the outside. She used her skills, her charisma and her charm, to make an escape route. But she hesitated during her attack, and it all went to hell. Then Leon, who could have left Sayaka sitting in that bathroom with her broken wrist, decided to go all out and try to escape himself. Faced with bad situations, both of the students gave into their desperation, hoping to escape the school. This doesn't absolve them of any guilt, but it reminds us that the only reason the class is here is thanks to the mastermind's meddling. And in the end, they did get what they wanted, albeit in a much different form than first desired. Speaking of a painful release from life, there's also the spectacle of each trial, the execution. Leon's execution is simple, sadistic, and symbolic of his character. The way the class reacts to his execution also reminds us that the death game is only enjoyable for one entity, that entity of course being Monokuma. All in all, I think that Chapter 1 is a good start to the game. It acquaints us with most of the game's mechanics and sets our expectations of future trials. The weakest point would probably be Leon's lack of character, but somebody has to take the fall for the tutorial case. Oh yeah, Junko also bit the dust kind of early, but the class did need to learn the importance of obeying Monokuma, so that can't be avoided either. Now let's get our first lore recap out of the way. 15 high schoolers have been trapped in Hope's Peak Academy. Completely isolated and constantly monitored, the students are stuck in a killing game, where the only way to escape the school is to get away with murder. The antagonist responsible for everything is Monokuma, a strange animatronic bear. The class has their suspicions about who the mastermind actually is, but at the moment it's nothing but basic conjecture. All in all, we have no idea what happened for the class to have ended up in this situation. So far, 3 students have died. Sayaka, who was killed while trying to ambush Leon, Leon, who was executed after killing Sayaka, and Junko, who was punished for disobeying Monokuma. Now, let's begin Chapter 2. We start out with Makoto checking his room post-trial. When he looks in his bathroom, it's spotless, like nothing had ever happened there. The next day, we see that Monokuma has called everyone to the gym again. Fortunately, it's just an annoying ploy. Monokuma Tai Chi. Well, that, and we learn that a new area of the school will open after each case is finished. So, the students explore the newly opened second floor of the school, finding 2 new rooms, the library and the swimming pool. The library is, well, a library. Here is where we find our first clue to what's going on. An old news article talking about Hope's Peak Academy's closure due to uncontrollable circumstances. Stranger still, the letter seems to be over a year old, which should mean that the school was closed long before anybody first arrived. We also find a laptop, but it's broken and we can't do anything with it. Lastly, an archive room is at the back of the library, hosting a wide variety of important looking documents. The swimming pool has 2 locker rooms, one for girls and one for boys. These locker rooms contain a decent amount of gym equipment, meaning that Hifumi can finally make the most diabolical cut of the century. The only way for a student to get into these rooms is to use their e-handbooks. Attempting to sneak into the wrong locker room will be punished accordingly. In order to close a loophole regarding breaking into the locker rooms, Monokuma writes a new rule. Students are not allowed to loan their handbooks to other students. Other than that, Monokuma's a degenerate, and Chihiro seems shy about going swimming with the other girls. Back on the first floor, 2 more rooms have opened up as well, the bathhouse and the warehouse. The bathhouse has a sauna, a bath, and a locker room, and is one of the few rooms in the school without cameras. The warehouse has basically anything the students could want, except for an escape route, of course. The class discusses their exploration in the lunchroom. Between this discussion and the one that happens the following day, we can tell that Celeste is a major bitch, and Hifumi is wrapped around her little finger. We also see that Byakuya is already intent on not cooperating and coexisting with the other students, as he instead occupies the library. After these discussions, we're let loose for a few free time segments. There's not much happening while we go through our free time, so let's just talk about the roles of each phase in regard to the story. School life is generally the narrative-focused phase, It builds up the chapter's narrative and case, and it also tends to advance the overarching narrative between Monokuma, the cast, and our desperately needed background info. Of course, it's also the main way we learn about the rest of the cast. I know I said I was going to skip over the free time segments, but I should at least explain how they work. Basically, you can dedicate each turn to hanging out with one person. Each time you do this, it improves your relationship with them. You can also give them one gift each turn, which will raise their relationship considerably more than just hanging out with them. When you level up their relationship, you get little interactions and usually unlock new abilities or bonuses that you can take advantage of during the next school trial. When you max out a person's relationship, a star appears next to their profile in your e-handbook. The friendship system is quite unforgiving, as it has very little information about it in-game. Both obtaining and giving gifts are effectively luck-based tasks, and on average you have 4 free time segments per chapter. It can be hard to max out multiple people in one playthrough, especially if you aren't actively trying to do so, or if you just make bad guesses about the victims of each chapter. The system honestly makes up a good portion of the game's replay value, as a game that hinges on a good story can't really be experienced the same way after that first playthrough. I'm sure I'll talk more about the friendship system and our class in another video though. Anyways, our second chapter's school life goes pretty similarly to our first chapter. Relations improve and we get our 2 main groups, Byakuya and Toko, and everybody else. Byakuya takes on the role of the common enemy of the rest of the class, and we help Toko start orbiting around Byakuya as some sort of twisted karmic justice. Mondo and Taka also challenge each other to an endurance battle in the sauna at the tail end of school life, and emerge the next morning as best bros. But things are too peaceful for too long, so we get our second motive. Monokuma hands everybody a piece of paper detailing their darkest or most embarrassing secret. If a murder isn't committed in 24 hours, then everybody's secrets will be revealed to the class. Makoto's secret is embarrassing, but he isn't willing to kill over it and assumes everybody else feels the same. Unfortunately, he's poorly mistaken.
Good morning!
Rubbing tragedy in our faces, Monokuma wakes us up, telling us that there's a fresh body somewhere in the school. We search the school, eventually coming to the swimming pool. Byakuya says that we should check the girls' locker room, which has been unlocked for the purpose of investigating. We enter the room, and... We talk with Byakuya about the murder for a second. He seems very nonchalant about the whole thing, but that's not exactly off-brand for him as far as we've seen. We also hear the body discovery announcement for the first time, which Byakuya tells us happens whenever 3 or more people have discovered a body. Taka walks in on us and brings everybody else to the locker room, with Toko fainting as soon as she sees Chihiro. She wakes up acting strangely, and Hina brings her to her room as we begin our second investigation. Just like the school life phase, let's talk about the investigation phase for a sec. Investigations are where we get a lot of unorganized information, usually for the case at hand, but occasionally for the larger story. It's a pretty standard process for mystery games. We get all the pieces of the puzzle in our investigation, and then at the end of the investigation, we have to put those pieces together. Honestly, there's not much else to say about the investigations, so let's just get into our second one. We go into the investigation with rough suspicions of the killer being Genocide Jack, a deranged serial killer. This is thanks in no small part to Byakuya, who has continuously informed and reminded everybody of Genocide Jack's existence. In response to this allegation, Monokuma does come up with another rule. A blackened student can only kill a maximum of 2 people. As per usual, we start with the case file. Chihiro was discovered in the girls' bathroom, and the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. She also died around 2 a.m. We look on the ground where a dumbbell seems to be the murder weapon. We then talk to Sakura, who believes that Chihiro came to the locker room late at night to work out. She says that Chihiro avoided working out with her and Hina, but that Chihiro still wanted to get stronger and was probably going to the gym to work out with somebody else. Mondo corroborates this, saying that Chihiro obviously had some sort of complex regarding her weakness. Before we investigate the body, Byakuya decides to play Sherlock Holmes, so we're stuck with him for a while as Watson. While with him, we first talk to Monokuma, where we can see a loophole in the rules. Loaning out your handbook isn't allowed, but you can borrow the handbooks from dead students. These handbooks are located in the main hall. We go to the main hall to verify this, and we find that Leon's handbook actually seems to be broken. despite Monokuma claiming that it couldn't have been broken by Leon's execution. Next, we head over to Toko's room at the request of Hina. She's acting weird, saying something about a promise made to Byakuya. But no good info is found, so we head over to the archives next. We see that the archives hosts various classified documents, among them being the Genocide Jack case file. We see the modus operandi of Genocide Jack, which involves suspending victims in the air and writing bloodlust in the background. Jack's identity is also suspected to be a student suffering from dissociative identity disorder. Moreover, this file is a classified document, so Byakuya claims that the only person who would know Jack's MO would be Jack. Having learned about Jack, we're left on our own. So we finally go back to investigate Chihiro's body. First, Hifumi interrupts us, claiming to have a piece of evidence that he won't show us. He also mentions that Celeste has some more information for us. Then we get sidetracked and go into the boys' locker room, where we can find two things: the poster of a boy band and a dark stain on the carpet. Finally getting our priorities straight, we investigate everything in the girls' locker room. The poster on the wall is of a swimsuit model, which seems weird when combined with the boy band poster that was in the boys' locker room. Next, Sakura mentions that a coffee stain she had made on the girls' carpet is no longer there. Still putting off investigating Chihiro, we talk to Kyoko, who says that Chihiro's handbook is missing. Finally, we look at the body. We see that Chihiro is hung up by a rope, and also note that the impact to her head seems kind of weird in the context of a Genocide Jack murder. We go to the library, where we confirm that the rope used was actually an extension cord. Byakuya usually used an extension cord in the library, but now that extension cord is missing, so that's probably where it went. We also went to look at the Genocide Jack case file again, but Byakuya apparently stole it. Continuing to wander around the school, we go talk to Celeste in the warehouse. She had actually seen Chihiro the previous night, as Chihiro took a tracksuit and a duffel bag from the warehouse. Last but not least, we talk to Hina, who raves about donuts and mentions that Chihiro avoided hanging out with her and all of the other girls. Monokuma closes our investigation off, and we head to the red door for our second trial. He also drags Toko out of her room by force, as she's still uncooperative. Just like for investigation in school life, let's talk about the trials a little bit more. The trials obviously increase in difficulty throughout the game, and it introduces new mechanics for these first couple of trials as well. This time we're greeted with white noise, which can physically block contradictions if you don't shoot them down first, and the rewind bullet, where we take somebody's argument from the conversation and use it to shoot down another part of the conversation.
No, that's wrong.
As for the story role of trials, they're probably self-explanatory. They put together the narrative for our case, and occasionally help clarify aspects of the overarching narrative. I mean, there's not much else to say, is there? So let's just start the second trial. We get one thing clarified off the bat, the murder weapon being the dumbbell. Then, Byakuya jumps to proclaiming the killer to be Genocide Jack. We back him up with the evidence that we've obtained, and then he accuses Toko of being Genocide Jack. Nobody plays defense for her, and we get a spelling minigame. The answer to the spelling minigame is schizo, but that's not accurate. Just like the case file claims, Toko has DID. Toko doesn't deny it, and it lines up with her previous behavior. Byakuya reveals that he was told about it the previous night, and that he betrayed Toko's trust to tell everybody else. Cracking under the pressure, Toko faints, and arising in her place is...
Well, hello there! Is it me you were hoping to see?
So it seems that Toko has DID and is indeed Genocide Jack, or rather, Genocide Jill. With Jill awake, we get to question her about the murder. Interestingly enough, Jill claims that she didn't actually commit the murder. Between Chihiro not being stabbed to death, not being suspended by Jill's special scissors, and not fitting the victim profile of a guy, it actually seems pretty plausible that she wasn't the murderer. But if she isn't the killer, and the only people who knew about Jill's MO were the people who've read that case file, then who killed Chihiro? Well, Byakuya was the one who showed us the file, so he's the only candidate.
Here's my answer.
Byakuya keeps cool at the accusation, poking and prodding us for evidence proving he murdered her. From him telling us to check the girls' locker room at the start, to the extension cord used to tie up Chihiro's body, everything comes together quite well as Byakuya having a hand in the murder. But Byakuya keeps treating it like a game, and we realize that we still have a lot of evidence that we haven't used yet. So, Makoto brings up the possibility of a crime scene switch. Byakuya is taken off guard at this proposition, angrily demanding evidence for his theory. Makoto provides the requested evidence via the posters and the rugs,
Got it!
but the class still doubts him. After all, there is no feasible way for Chihiro to get into the boys' locker room, even with the handbook loophole. Kyoko, however, backs up Makoto, requesting a recess to investigate something. Monokuma obliges, and we find ourselves back at Chihiro's body. Sakura examines the body again, and we find...
This girl is
what?
a boy!
Back in the courtroom, we finally peel back the layers of the case. Jill isn't the killer, but neither is Byakuya, and Chihiro, who is actually a boy, was murdered in the boys' locker room. That rules out all of the girls as suspects too, as the only handbook that could have been used, Leon's handbook, seems to be broken. But we still don't know who the killer is, and we've exhausted most of our evidence. Digging for more leads, Celeste brings up her testimony. The previous night, she had seen Chihiro grabbing a tracksuit and a duffel bag. Kyoko proclaims that the key to this case lies in the details of the tracksuit. So, as the class discusses, Mondo mentions something about a blue tracksuit.
No, that's wrong.
But Celeste never mentioned what color the tracksuit was. Kyoko had laid a trap, and Mondo got caught hook, line, and sinker. But maybe it's just a bad coincidence. Then, Hifumi brings up the piece of evidence he was sitting on. He found a broken e-handbook, presumably Chihiro's. After confirmation from Monokuma, we learn that the handbook's only weakness is being exposed to high temperatures. Coincidentally, Hifumi found the handbook in the sauna. And the only person that we've seen go into the sauna with their clothes on, who could have possibly figured out that the heat breaks handbooks, is...
Here's my answer.
With Mondo panicked and Taka in disbelief, we have to prove that Mondo's handbook is broken. So, Mondo asks him to show his handbook, since Leon's handbook couldn't have been broken by his execution. With Mondo still panicked and Taka in complete denial, we get our closing argument for the case.
First, let's take a look back to before the incident. Last night, Celeste saw Chihiro in the warehouse, correct? At the time, she was apparently stuffing something into a duffel bag. That something was a blue tracksuit. You can confirm this, right, Celeste? With bag in hand, Chihiro headed out, even though it was officially nighttime. She made her way to the locker room, specifically the boys' locker room. But how could the victim, who was apparently a girl, access the boys' locker room? Simple, because she was really a he, which is why he was able to use his own e-handbook to gain entrance to the boys' locker room. Once inside, he met with someone there, and the person he met was the one who killed him. It seems likely that the killer grabbed the nearby dumbbell, approached the unsuspecting Chihiro, and attacked him. And that's where the bloodstains on the poster and carpeting in the boys' locker room came from. It was likely in the heat of the moment. The body was arranged, but the murder itself felt unplanned. Which is why the killer hurried to try and hide the act. First, pulling up the bloodstained carpet, then removing the bloody poster, and finally carrying the corpse into the girls' locker room. A girl's handbook was necessary to get into the locker room, of course, but this alone doesn't prove that the killer was necessarily a girl. After all, Sayaka and Junko's handbooks had been placed in the main hall. Using one of those, a boy could get into the girls' locker room without much problem. And that's exactly how the killer did it. With the carpet and the poster they brought with them, they got to work. They changed the layout of the boys' and girls' locker room in what you might call a crime scene switch. That could have been the end of things, but no. Byakuya discovered the body and decided to intervene in the situation. making things even more complicated. So, after stumbling on the crime scene, he went and grabbed the extension cord from the library, and then he got to work. He used the cord to string up Chihiro's lifeless body. Then, using the victim's own blood, he left a grisly message there at the scene of the crime. He wanted to create the illusion that Genocide Jack was responsible for the slaughter. And around the same time that Byakuya was putting together this facade, the killer, having already disposed of Chihiro's bag and other belongings, arrived at the sauna. There, they planned to destroy the last piece of evidence, Chihiro's handbook. And just as the killer expected, the steamy sauna was enough to ruin the electronic gadget. Somehow, the killer knew that the handbook couldn't stand up to the heat of the sauna. And the reason they knew that is because the sauna had already wrecked their own handbook. And that's how it all played out. Isn't that right, Mondo Arata?
After piecing the case together, Mondo is silent. Taka, however, is plenty loud. He vehemently denies Mondo's guilt, and as such we have to shut him down in a bullet-time battle. After the battle though, Mondo admits his guilt. The class votes, and Mondo is found guilty of murdering Chihiro. But why did Mondo do it? Well, I would let Mondo and Monokuma tell you, but the voice acting goes away, so I'm left to summarize. Before Mondo was the leader of his biker gang, his brother occupied the role. His brother was a fearless leader whom the entirety of the gang looked up to. Mondo grew jealous of his brother's toughness, harboring an inferiority complex over it. This culminated in Mondo challenging his brother to a race. Mondo threw caution to the wind, getting closer and closer to oncoming traffic, until... Although Mondo was directly responsible for his brother's death, he kept that a secret from the gang. Not just out of selfishness, but out of his brother's dying wish, to keep the gang together. If the true story got out, the gang would be in shambles. Unsurprisingly, this was the secret that Monokuma was going to reveal. So why was Chihiro the victim? Well, there's a lot to unpack. Chihiro's a boy, but he's always had an inferiority complex due to his lack of strength. This strength isn't just physical, but also mental. It's an unwillingness to face hardship or uncomfortable situations head on. He couldn't face his weakness, so he hid from it. He began dressing and acting like a girl, so that neither himself nor others would question his lack of strength. As you might expect, this was written on Chihiro's secret card. But Chihiro took advantage of his misfortune. In a tough situation, Chihiro decided to use the surrounding pressure to begin molding himself into somebody better, somebody that he could be proud of. But Chihiro still lacked physical strength and the knowledge to get better. He wouldn't be able to make his journey alone. So, he confided in his new role model, Mondo. Mondo was everything that Chihiro strived to be, or more precisely, lacked. Strong, dependable, and capable of protecting himself and others. Chihiro asked Mondo to help him change, and that night the two of them went to the boys' locker room to train. But as Chihiro praised Mondo's strength, Mondo was reminded of his own shortcomings that had painted blood on his hands. Unfortunately for Chihiro, the macho persona he looked up to wasn't perfect. And with those shortcomings pounding against the walls of Mondo's mind, along with the looming threat of his brother's dream falling apart, Mondo snapped. And, well, we know the rest. With the full story, let's get on to Mondo's execution. After the execution, we still have one glaring issue, Byakuya's tampering of Chihiro's body. When questioned by the class, his answer is, well, poor to say the least. Isn't it obvious? Because it made things more interesting. Byakuya is unhinged, he kinda just pisses everyone off more and refuses to elaborate. It's obvious that they won't get him to change his ways though, so Kyoko shifts her focus to the bear. Kyoko asks the bear why he has forced everybody into the game, and his reply is to turn all hope into despair. It's an answer, although a seemingly nonsensical one. In response to Monokuma's cryptic message, Byakuya declares his intentions to everybody. Byakuya will escape the killing game at all costs, but once he's escaped, he will find the mastermind and he will kill them. So I mean, at the very least, the class still has that common enemy. Then, in one final scene, we see that the mastermind isn't the only threat. A spy is among us, among the class, working for Monokuma. In addition to there being a spy, there's also supposedly a 16th student in the school. With that, Chapter 2 ends. This case had a pretty big narrative. In a tragically ironic twist, Chihiro's desire for strength led to him being killed by his strongman idol. And Mondo couldn't face his past mistakes despite all of his physical strength. I will say that Mondo's absurd execution kind of ruins the tone for the chapter. It feels more weird than brutal, and I think a more symbolic execution would have had a better payoff, but I guess they were just trying to lighten up the chapter a bit, although the results were questionable at best. As for the rest of the chapter, it mainly played more into character and plot establishment. Byakuya has no personal limits when it comes to antagonizing the class. Then, there's a bona fide serial killer among the class. And lastly, Kyoko kinda carries these trials right now. Aside from our known characters, the audience is also aware of both a traitor in the class and an unknown 16th student in the school. Now, let's do Chapter 2's lore recap. 16 students were trapped in the killing game at Hope's Peak Academy. The identity of one of the students is unknown, and one of the known students is working with the mastermind. Monokuma seems intent on bringing despair to the students, so much so that it's his reason for facilitating the killing game. The mystery doesn't get any better, as Hope's Peak was closed down at some point in time, seemingly before the students had even got to the school. Finally, the class has been reduced to 10 known students and 1 unknown student. This is due to the deaths of Chihiro and Mondo. With chapters 1 and 2 finished, our stage has been set. The dismal tone of the second chapter, combined with the very few story clues that we found, have given us a pretty strong desire to find out more about the school. Then, between the reduced cast size, the existence of a traitor and an unknown student, and the venomous dynamics between some of our characters, our tension has similarly been built up. I think it's safe to call these first 2 chapters our exposition. From here on out, though, the story gets real. At this point, if you do still have a genuine interest in the game's story, then it would probably be a good idea to experience the game in a more hands-on fashion. Whether that's actually playing the game yourself, or just watching a silent playthrough or a stream, I can assure you that the story won't let you down and that it will be an enjoyable experience. Unfortunately, however, this is where it ends. This specific video, I mean. I've been working on this thing sporadically for the past 10 months. I did want to do the full video in one go, but I was woefully unprepared for that big of a task. I jumped into the deep end and I barely know how to swim. So for the sake of both my channel and my sanity, I'm stopping the video here. Eventually I will make a second video where I go through the rest of the game, but for now I really just want to work on some new projects and not have anything to do with Danganronpa for a bit. That being said, thank you all for watching. It's been a joy to make this video, and I hope to continue making more content about all sorts of topics. I have a lot of ideas, but if you all think of some interesting ones, feel free to let me know in the comments. And finally, if you've enjoyed this past hour, then feel free to subscribe. It helps the channel and lets you know when I finally post more videos. This has been Zanpakuto, and once again, thanks for watching.